Hi, I'm Craig Campbell, and I'm going to be talking about virtuality. Specifically, I'll be going through a program for how digital interfaces, as they're used in the humanities generally and the study of architecture in particular, can be imagined less as lenses that draw virtual artifacts into focus and more as co-productive vehicles for scholastic production. My digital humanities project is a piece of my senior thesis in architectural studies. Over the course of this year, I've been exploring how the notion of the virtual has been considered in terms of digital technology, but also in terms of its philosophical lineage. From here, I consider strategies for how virtuality might be channeled into the production of new spaces. The virtual, which I take to mean the real realm of possibility, is something that disappears upon its own realization. As soon as the virtual becomes actualized in space, it is no longer virtual. So it is necessary to approach it by proxy, through metaphor. The metaphor I have found most apt is that of the fog, which frames the virtual as a dense and sticky condition of reality, something that you can't cut up or put in a box or keep inside of a screen. With the virtual, as with the fog, you have to feel your way through. My project exchanges text for space and space for text. Everything is at once a textual space and a spatial text. My goal has been to show that with the virtual and in the fog, the direction of the metaphor doesn't really matter. Everything is simultaneous. For this project, I've been using Scalar, a content authoring system hosted at USC, in order to create a reading experience that engages both storytelling and critical analyses, collapsing form and function into a single hypertextual document. What you see here is the incipient form of a map of this text, which I'll get back to later. But first I want to talk about windows. The window, we know, is an architectural element. It is a negative space carved out of the positive structure of a wall, creating visual access to what lies beyond it by thresholding inside and out. In Renaissance Italy, humanism first became vitalized as the critical window for framing the human experience. At the same time and place, single-point perspective was developed as an innovation in visual media. In perspective drawing, we see imagery coordinated with respect to a disappearing point on a horizon line in order to simulate three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional scale. By adding apparent depth to the flat surface, perspectival imagery suggests the ability to move forward into the image. But perspective may have met its end at the computer desktop. Media theorist Anne Friedberg writes, "Above, below, ahead, and behind are simultaneous on the computer display, where each element in the composition is seen separately with no systematic spatial relationship between them." Although the algorithmic constructions found in video games, QuickTime panoramas, and virtual reality systems continue to rely on digital simulacra of perspectival space, not all digital space is designed to suggest three dimensions. Instead, the vernacular space of the computer screen has far more in common with the surfaces of cubism, and their frontality, suppression of depth, and overlapping layers, than with the extended depth of Renaissance perspective. So what we face on the computer screen is at once an information surface and a navigational terminal. The screen is a page, which suggests a textual experience of an opaque surface, and a window, which is a spatial experience of a transparent threshold. The argument that I make in this project is that the combination of transparency and opacity result in their negation and their double, the mirror. The computer mirror creates a new posture for the practice of reading and writing in digital paradigms, which requires you to look at pages as if through the frame of a window, which amounts to placing yourself inside of the textual space entirely. So consider the back and forward tabs of web browsers. They face right and left, indicating a forward textual movement. This suggests a linear reading experience that mimics the textual dimension of a book. But if we accept that cyberspace is indeed a space, and I do because we call the internet a place where things happen, then we also accept that there is some kind of spatiality to it. Since the computer screen is experienced in real time, it produces space in a way similar to other time-based media. The experience of still images and text in a hypertextual environment becomes cinematic. The sequence of these texts and images produces meaning in their juxtaposition in time and through space. You don't just surf the web, you rather navigate it in a series of overlapping jump cuts. Unlike the film viewer, however, the computer user determines their own movements. These self-determined movements animate the multimedia objects, and the experience of depth comes alive. The digital montage creates a rich and dynamic in-between space in which meaning may emerge. So where does this leave the window? In the humanities, we often develop critical lenses through which we scrutinize our objects of inquiry. In the digital humanities, this corresponds nicely to the conception of a computer screen as a focusing lens onto digital objects that lie in there, on the other side. This way of approaching humanities scholarship analyzes objects as if under a microscope. It identifies a clearly defined set of objects of interest and places them behind a frame. But modern physics, according to its principal theorists, destroys the concept of the world sitting out there. To observe an object so minuscule and basic as an electron, the researcher has to reach through the plate and shatter the glass. He must cease to be observer and instead become a participator. I think that in the humanities, too, it is much more tempting to think about shattering our critical lenses, to reach through the virtual window, and in doing this, imagine a new paradigm for scholastic production entirely. After all, the most interesting meaning to be found in the humanities lies in the interconnection of frames anyway. Architecture Elizabeth Gross suggests that this constitutes the act of architecture itself. She writes, "The emergence of the frame is the condition of all of the arts, and is the particular contribution of architecture to the taming of the virtual, the territorialization of the uncontrollable forces of the earth. Architecture is the constitution of interlocking frames, frames that can connect with, contain, and be contained by other frames. Architecture is the creation of frames as cubes, interconnecting cubes, cubes reflected or distorted, cubes opened up, inflected, or cut open." So according to Gross, the frame makes the virtual tame. That is, the frame makes the virtual readable and legible. But connecting these frames and using the virtual dimensions to extrude them into space is what makes virtuality interesting. In my DH project, I've explored the works of artists and architects who do not place digital tools in architectural space in any hierarchy to one another, but rather blend them together in order to generate a fog of potential for possible spatial experiences. These works can be thought of as a vehicle that spatializes the flatness of the lens, resulting in a mobile framework that can accelerate, that engineers encounters rather than speculations, that moves through contradictions rather than cropping them out of the frame. In my project, some of these works include an ephemeral light show that choreographs commercial projection technologies based on user input from the public it reaches, a crude dataset corresponding to a stock anime character who travels from medium to digital medium to speak about her own condition as a representation, and a building made out of fog that is navigated sensuously with a digitally programmed raincoat that steers you through the whiteout according to proximity with other bodies. To analyze these, I've appealed to an ethic that does not begin on the outside to look in. Instead, I have attempted to build an interface that co-produces meaning with, rather than on behalf of, the objects on display, that does not focus these projects but rather blurs them together to create new ways of seeing them entirely. So here's the map of the Scalar Interface. Throughout this process, I've converted my notes into tags and chapters into paths. Everything is connected. All the texts exist at once in multiple frames. What we see here is a narrative thread, but it is just as easy to jump over into a different text where this fragment produces a different whole in relation to other chunks of content it intersects. Fragments and threads become embedded in one another, according to a structuring of content that I determined through the back end of the system. The document is still in progress. In all, it will include about 400 individual media objects that together make up about 75,000 words of content. It's been fun to see how the map has warped with the inclusion of different authors, where the nodes start to emerge, and how my writing, when stripped of semantic content and left only with its relationality, forms unforeseen geometries and new textual architectures. The trick in all of this is to make sure that the frame remains legible as it's transgressed, and that the blur remains recognizable, even when it's filled with fog. Thank you.